My name's Ashlen Hilliard. I'm the assistant to the executive director for the International Cultic Studies Association. I'm here today with Cyndi Matthews, Dr. Cyndi Matthews, and Dr. Colleen Logan. I realize that it says both their names are Cyndi Matthews. Will the real Cyndi please wave their hand in the air?
No, that's me.
That's her. Okay. Just so everybody knows. That's the real Cyndi Matthews. Dr. Colleen Logan is here as well. We were really excited to have them speak this morning and participate in this virtual event series. This virtual event series started because it's been a really tough and challenging time in the world right now. And we really just wanted to provide resources for those leaving fundamentalist groups, cultic groups, head control groups. Cult recovery is never canceled, as we've been saying with this series, and we just wanted to keep the resources going for all of you who need help. And Dr. Colleen Logan and Dr. Cyndi Matthews, they were going to be speaking at the Dallas conference in April, which of course we had to postpone to September. And so I'm really excited to hear more from you guys today on repairing the repair. I love the title of your talk today, and I will be here if you need anything, and I will be keeping an eye out for any Q&A that comes through. So thank you very much for.
Thanks, Ashlen. So hi, everybody. Welcome. Glad you guys are here. Dr. Logan and I are going to be talking about repairing the repair. We were going to be speaking at the Spiritual Abuse Conference, as Ashlen said, in Dallas. And we actually had a nice little track about LGBTQ and spiritual abuse and how that relates and correlates. So we're just going to get your attention and get you excited and intrigued about coming in September or October, whenever we can get this thing going again, depending on the SMU football schedule and depending on, social distancing, whatever happens. So we'll do some quick introductions, and then Dr. Logan and I, may I call you Colleen? Colleen.
Please do.
Okay, and you may call me Cyndi. So we're going to have a conversation, not a presentation, just talk about some of the things going on for LGBTQ and spiritual abuse. So I'm Dr. Cyndi Matthews. I teach at Southern Methodist University in their graduate counseling program. I have a private practice in Garland, and I work with spiritual abuse, domestic violence, cult recovery, all of those kind of things. And my pronouns are she, her, and hers. How about you, Colleen?
Thank you. My name is Dr. Colleen Logan, and I'm a clinical associate professor in the counseling program at Southern Methodist University. I've had quite a long career as an LGBTQ activist in terms of my private practice, in terms of my teaching, and in terms of the honor of serving as a former American Counseling Association president. And in all of those areas, I have committed my career to social justice advocacy, in particular in working affirmatively with the LGBTQ community.
Awesome. So it's interesting, Colleen, you and I both work at Southern Methodist University, which has Methodist in the name. I was just thinking about that, and here we're talking about spirituality and LGBTQ, and sometimes that can be seen as two very opposite kind of things. So what made you go to SMU as a religious institution? It's not really a religious institution, but they call it secular, but it's there, and all of this kind of stuff that's going on. What made you go there?
Because, you're right. Southern Methodist University, who'd have thought that they are one of the premier institutions that has a concentration in terms of working affirmatively with LGBTQ individuals, LGBTQ couples and families, and LGBTQ folks who are non-gender conforming or transgender, and also and these concepts are woven throughout the entire curriculum, the idea of social justice and advocating for those who are marginalized, who don't have access to affirmative mental health services. So, honestly, when I stumbled upon the program, and at the time they were in Plano, I thought, what? Oh my gosh, this is it. I have finally found home and where I want to work and teach and here it was right in my backyard. I live in Richardson, Texas, by the way.
Great. Yeah, I was really surprised too. Colleen and I have only been there for less than a year at SMU. And one of the first things that they said to me was, know that the battle right now between the Methodist Church, because they were having the whole vote, and SMU, it is not one we're involved in. Our president has put out a statement specifically saying that we advocate for and support and celebrate LGBTQ individuals and weave it throughout the curriculum. So I've had several people ask me, how can you be at a religious institution? But they claim that they are a secular institution. So it's really interesting how that kind of winds in together. So I want to point out before we start talking about spiritual abuse and reparative therapy, that spirituality and religiosity can be a real source of strength. And whenever I talk about this, I always have these comments of, yeah, but it's a great sense of strength. Why do you keep putting it down? It's not that we are, and it can be a source of strength. However, there are times when it can be very destructive, hurtful, and harmful. So that's the caveat. So know that anytime we're talking, this doesn't apply to all people, all institutions, all religions, or all spiritual practices. This is some. Okay, so Dr. Logan, or Colleen, how do you define spiritual abuse? I define it one way, you define another. How do you see spiritual abuse?
You know, spiritual abuse to me refers to ways of referring to groups, people, humans in a way that says, because you are this way, because you love who you love, you are somehow an abomination, you're perverted, you're sinful, you imagine you're the cause of natural disasters such as tornadoes and hurricanes, and you brought HIV, and God smites you and would prefer that you die than be on this earth. And to couch those kinds of traumatic, gut-wrenching, shaming messages with spirituality, it is incredibly abusive, and it's long-lasting in its effect, and it's traumatizing, and it makes one question one's existence to your very cells. And that's
it's really interesting that you say that it's couched within a spiritual framework. And yet we're talking about most religions have this very loving underpinning and love your neighbor and everything created by God, and or depending on your religious persuasion, I guess, that here it's couched in that, and yet coming out with these kind of edicts and kind of things that say you are the cause of the hurricane, you brought on yourself HIV and AIDS, or whatever they're saying, and how I define spiritual abuse is abuse towards any person or any group, and it can be through doctrine, and it can be by a person. So you could have a very abusive person, you can have an abusive doctrine, and then you can have an abusive person use the doctrine. And I see specifically what you're saying is with the LGBTQ community, individuals have taken doctrines and used it to be very hurtful and hateful, even to the point of saying you shouldn't exist. Is that what I hear?
Exactly. I mean, imagine that message. You're right. We're taught in many religious institutions where we're all made in God's image. Oh, except you. You're taught to love your neighbor, but not those neighbors. You're taught to be kind to one another, but not your LGBTQ children. Reject them. And the paradox and the shaming and the trauma is enormous.
Just very hurtful to even hear or even to think about. So you're a minister's kid, so which I just found amusing. I'm sorry, I don't know why. Tell us a little bit about your background and your upbringing and how you kind of saw this and moved you into social justice advocacy for LGBTQ individuals.
Sure. Yes, my father was a Presbyterian minister. I was born in Northern Ireland. I'm from Northern Ireland. My whole family is from Northern Ireland, and he took a job in Pittsburgh, and I grew up in Pittsburgh in the Presbyterian church, and he was the minister in the largest Presbyterian church downtown Pittsburgh. And you know, I was taught what folks are taught in church, the Bible versus what Jesus said, what Jesus did. A lot of focus on the New Testament, not as much on the Old, but certainly it was infused. And I was a minister's kid, so there was a higher expectation in terms of behavior. And yes, I was the typical minister's kid, so I acted out just as I should have as a minister's kid. And I look back on my life, the reason that I acted out was for a number of things. First of all, we lived in Franklin Park, which is in North Hills in Pittsburgh. And my father would cut the grass wearing wellies and a bowler. And instead of using some kind of, chemical, even if it was, climate friendly, he would use a blowtorch to get rid of the dandelions.
Ooh.
That should have been enough, right? With our scorched earth in Franklin Park, right? I had red hair. That should have been enough. I struggled with my weight. That should have been enough. What I struggled with was I knew from a very young age that I was different, that I really was enamored, attracted. I don't know that I could put words around what I felt, but I knew that I felt warm and really kind of tingly when I would think about my girlfriends, my camp counselor, my female teachers and counselors. And I just knew that. And I knew I didn't feel that same way toward boys. And, I remember we went to church. Well, we went to church a lot, to say that. And because we were usually late. So we were always going at Mach 5 to go downtown to church. We were driving back and forth. And I remember one night coming back from evening church after we'd been at morning church and afternoon church, that I wanted to ask my dad, I knew something was different. It was just he and I in the car. I just wanted to ask him what he thought about it. I thought my dad was a pretty cool guy. And I'd already looked it up in the dictionary. I already looked up homosexuality and I thought, well, it doesn't really feel like, look like, sound like who I am, but let me ask my dad. He'll know. So I said, Dad, I have a question for you. And he turned down the talk radio. And normally if he turned down the talk radio in the car, it was not good. But in this case, he really wanted to hear me. And I said, Dad, I think I'm homosexual. That's what you just heard now. That's what I heard. Silence. And he said, Colleen, you're not that. They're dirty, dirty people. They kiss with their mouths open. I know, just let that kind of metabolize. I mean, it tells you so much about my father.
Wow.
In so many ways.
Wow. How old were you at this point?
I was about 10.
10. And that was the response of complete denial, of just brushing it off. And no, you're not, because they kiss with their mouths open and it's dirty.
They kiss with their mouths. Now, it makes you wonder about my father, definitely. But certainly for me, that was the last thing that I was thinking about. And I thought, well, never asking that question again.
Right.
And so, I can tell the rest of my story of kind of coming out and living out. But it took me a while to recover from being told, no, you're not. No, you are not who you are. Okay. I'm not who I am. I'm not who I am. Okay, I'll try to be what they want me to be. I will try to be heterosexual. Guess what? All of the men that I dated were gay.
Oh, wow. Okay. What did that tell you?
It was great. We had a great time. Because there was, and so it looked to my parents that I had got out of that phase and I was doing the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I had went along in my, through school, dated a gay boyfriend all the way through school. Went to Ireland for a year, actually, to boarding school, and came back, and my parents felt like I needed some more social graces, education, to really focus on my studies. So they sent me to all girls school.
Oh, yeah, that was great. Yeah, perfect.
Oh, okay, I'll go there. So I spent my high school years at a girls' school, which was perfect.
You were pleased, yeah.
It was like my glee.
Yeah.
And then when I was I had relationships I had girlfriend in high school. I had a girlfriend in college, and I finally did come out to my parents early 20s. And my mom absolutely stopped speaking to me for a year. My father said, "We love you no matter what," which has of course, the implication that even though you have this ugliness, this abomination,
This disease kind of
this
thing,
disease,
yeah.
because you happen to be my daughter, I'm still gonna love you.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, okay, I guess that's how it is. Although my mom's rejection was particularly painful, and I think that's true for most folks coming out. The rejection of the same gender parent is painful, and that really speaks more to the parent than
Mm-hmm.
the person coming out. And then in terms of my career, once I was out that door, I never went back in. And honestly, I don't. And even though coming out is something that happens on a daily, sometimes hourly basis,
Right.
I've committed my life to living out. Yeah.
So, well, through that whole process of coming out, and I love the point that you were making of when you were very young, you knew you were somehow different and couldn't make sense of it, didn't have the language, which really speaks to this, is this really a choice thing? And we can get back to that. What was your relationship to spirituality and church that whole time? Was it a real questioning kind of thing? What was it for you?
Well, I mean, there was no one else like me.
Mm-hmm.
There was the organ player, and he was, I knew, everyone knew, but it was never talked about. Now,
That he was gay?
that he was gay, yes.
Okay.
I mean, he brought the most fabulous cupcakes to the parties, and he just always was fabulous. He was like our Liberace at First Presbyterian Church in Pittsburgh. He was fabulous. I loved him. But there was no mention of it. There was no recognition of his partner. There was no ever. There's silence. And from the pulpit was the message: man and woman getting married, having children, and being in God's favor. There was never any other paradigm, no other choice. And there was no other person that I could go to. There was no way I was going to another minister, especially my father. There was no way I was going to any youth group leader. No way. I was not going to voice this again, even though inside I was in incredible turmoil, and because I was swallowing the doctrine, in this case, that also came with people, including a parent, that I was a sinner, I was an abomination, I was perverted, I was never going to get married, I was never going to have children. It was like door number 1 or door number 2. Door number 1 has everything: dances and proms and weddings and approval. Door number 2 has thorns and dust and darkness. What are you going to choose?
Yeah, but door number 1 means you have to not be yourself. You can't be your authentic self and constantly be at odds with who you are and how you want to be. And it's just, wow, what a crazy time for you. And so you totally get and empathize with this whole thing, that as people are coming out to themselves and being within a religious structure that is not accepting. I'm interested to know, you're talking about, they talked a lot about heterosexual couples. Did they ever use the clobber scriptures of, homosexuality is bad, evil, all that kind of stuff?
Sodom and Gomorrah, the scripture referring to that, and man shall not live with them. Yes, those were used as proof that this heterosexual paradigm was the one and only paradigm, that there were no other paradigms. And so if you don't hear any other paradigms, then that becomes truth. And there was never any kind of explanation of kind of historical times or when the Bible is misused as a way to punish a certain group, a certain behavior. Never talk about that. It was always seen as we're right and everybody else is wrong.
So go ahead.
No, go ahead, please.
Well, so I'm really interested by what you're talking about here in terms of they're wrong, we're right, how certain groups really get called out and targeted. And I've really seen that with the LGBTQ community, with fundamentalist groups and such, is that they use these clobber scriptures you know, the Sodom and Gomorrah, man should not lay with another man, all of those scriptures. Why do you think it is that they do this? Is it some kind of insecurity with themselves? But I see this targeting going on, and you caused this hurricane, and you brought the plague of HIV. What do you think is going on there? I'm just wondering. It just
Sure. Because, you know, you can't, affectional orientation and gender are inextricably linked. And I say that because a lot of this comes from our artificial definitions of what makes a man and what makes a woman, let alone our discomfort with positive sexuality in general. So we'll put that on the shelf for a minute. Let's just talk about these artificial constructs, what makes a man and what makes a woman. Well, what we know is what we teach little boys from the beginning is not how to be a boy or how to be masculine or how to be a man. What we teach them is whatever you do, don't be a girl. Don't throw like a girl. Don't sit like a girl. Don't cry like a girl. Don't be a girl, right? And so and that's true about sexuality and being sexual, right? If you are, and you look at these scriptures, there are undertones of sex and sexuality in them. So if you're being penetrated, if you're submissive, that means you're like a girl who is supposed to be submissive and supposed to do whatever the man says. Well, that cannot occur if two men are together. Right? Now, for women, for girls, we give them a little more latitude. You can be a tomboy, as it's called, to a certain point, but at some point, that point is over, and you need to get on your path toward heterosexuality, or you're shunned, because that means you are not following the plan, God's plan. God's plan being to find a boyfriend and get married and have children.
So it kind of goes against this whole plan of man dominating, woman submitting, which I have whole issues with there, but yeah, some of the harder stuff I deal with. So it really goes against that to think of two men, one can't dominate another man, you're not on the right path, and then women, you need to be submitting to a man. Is that, so it really goes against what you're thinking that they wanted to put across.
Absolutely, to submit is seen as less than, right? Man is the power, and you know, it's interesting. I talk about this in classes whenever I teach addiction. You know, I frame everything around. People say, "Oh, back in college," that's when they'll always say, "Well, I tried pot," or that's when I had a six-pack. They certainly don't say last night when I sat down to drink a fifth of whiskey, right? It's always back in college, right? You know, back in college, you know, if you were to watch porn, let's say, and maybe that was back in college for some people, women and women together is very popular. Right? It's not men and men together, right? There's heterosexual porn, and then there's, you know, two women. But what happens at the end of that porn video? Again, back in college.
I have no idea.
Well, the man comes in.
Oh.
And the women could never pleasure each other without a man.
Oh, really?
You cannot, yes. So
it still speaks to that narrative. So I went to BYU for college, so we didn't do that.
Okay. Oh, I see. So there was no sexuality, no intimacy.
No, it was all denied.
I got it. Okay.
Nothing happened.
Right. So these constructs, you can't unlink them from how that has an impact on affectional orientation and how the Bible is misused and to support these artificial constructs that don't even make any sense in terms of masculine or feminine.
And remind me at the end, I really want to come back to where you are spiritually and religiously now. I want to come back to that piece. So let's talk about, so is it a choice? So what I hear a lot of pastors say and religious people say is, it's a choice, it's a preference, which is why they talk about reparative therapy as a thing, is we just have to help them make a different choice. And from what I'm hearing you say, it's not a choice. Speak to that a little bit.
Sure. I have a couple of things to say about that. First of all, in terms of a choice, the only choice that I have is whether to tell you who I am and who I love. That's the choice. And actually, the onus is on you to prove to me that you're different from anybody else. And I'm watching, I'm scanning the environment, because I assume you're not. I assume that you're going to be prejudiced and you're going to think lesser of me, and I'm not going to be equal to any other human being because of this blight that I have. So that's the choice I have. And you know, in terms of who I am and who I love, think about the background I just shared with you. I grew up a minister's kid, a Presbyterian Irish minister's kid. The expectation was that I was going to marry a minister and have kids.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like, you know, I think there's this implication, this idea of choice that one day, you know, since I was also the stereotypical preacher's kid where I was always up to a good time, that one day I would be up in my room and I'd wake up and say, how am I going to make them mad today? I know. I'll come downstairs and I'll sit at breakfast and I'll tell them, guess what? Good morning. Here's my Cheerios. I'm a lesbian. That just has no logic to it.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, what you will hear from LGBTQ individuals is they did everything they could to deny, not be who they were, not love who they love, which takes an incredible amount of energy and emotional resources that takes away from being able to develop as an adolescent, as a young adult, because I'm spending all of that energy and all of those resources trying to hide and get rid of who I am.
I think that's what I was really surprised with. I worked at the Resource Center, which is for LGBTQ youth in Dallas. I think that's the thing that overwhelmed me the most is when I would do groups or work with individuals, they're like, if I had a choice, I would choose to be heterosexual because my parents are abusing me, they're kicking me out. I would love to fit in, but I am who I am and I can't deny that. And it was, you know, we're talking 12-year-olds, 14-year-olds who are, you know, being beaten by their parents because they're coming out as gay or lesbian. And it's like, I would choose something else. I'm not doing this purposefully.
Right.
So that was really overwhelming for me to see that kind of response.
Absolutely. And as you know, that kind of beating it out of you, if we were to look at any of in the past, aversion therapy to current, what we do to our kids who are different, beating, throwing them out of the home, not providing them with resources, shunning them, isolating them, berating them. It's abusive. And it often comes with, this is God's will.
Yes.
And I will force you to be different.
Yeah, you are being disobedient to God. God himself is against you. And I think for those who are listening who are former cult members, I think you can probably relate to this in terms of being yourself, your authentic self, and the cult would try to get rid of that and say you are the cult. Trying to take away your authentic self, but your authentic self continues to come up, and if you could, you'd get rid of it, but you are who you are. And the beating, the abusing, the emotional abuse, physical, all that kind of stuff, it's consistent, and sexual abuse as well. So if that makes sense. So
and also, let me just add, I mean, and I really firmly believe this, no one should have to choose, and this is where that choice comes in, between their spirituality, their relationship with their God, and who they love.
Yeah,
that's just inhumane.
Yeah. So this kind of leads to the whole reparative therapy thing, of some religious leaders looking at some scriptures and thinking that it's a choice and people are going against God. Tell us about reparative therapy, what it is, how it came to be, and we'll have a conversation around that piece and how it relates to spirituality and religiosity.
Sure. We know that, you know, homosexuality was in the DSM, which is the book that we use to diagnose people. It was in through early 1970s. That meant it was a mental illness. And if you just try on that mental mantle, right? So I'm not only I'm perverted and I'm an abomination in God's eyes, I'm also mentally ill and treated as such. And you know, from that, which was so painful and so off base, in 1973, it was removed from the DSM-3. And that was a very derisive and very difficult vote to occur, because the psychiatrists at the time felt that if they hated themselves so much and they wanted to get rid of this sickness, they should be able to. And so we should keep it in the diagnostic manual. And realize that this is 1973. And out of that, and was born this idea of, and it's called different things: sexual reorientation, sexual refocusing, sexual reprogramming, reparative therapy, REPAR, ATIVE, and
conversion. I've heard conversion therapy.
But yeah, but the idea was it's repair, REPAIR, because you're broken.
Mm-hmm.
And so there came a great kind of backlash around reparative therapy. We have got to fix these people. Now, as we move towards the 2000s, any of the organizations such American Psychiatric Association, the American Psychological Association, the American Medical Association, the American Pediatric Association, and finally, the American Counseling Association.
Finally.
Very strongly that there is absolutely no evidence to support reparative therapy. It does not work. I could no longer, Cyndi, if you identify as heterosexual or affectionately oriented, I could no longer make you a lesbian, even though I want that toaster oven from the skies. Then you could convert me to be heterosexual. It doesn't work. There's no data to support it. None. Zero.
So what kind of things did they do in this reparative therapy? What kind of things did they do? I mean, because I know there are states that still allow it. There's still pastors that do it. There's still people who do it.
If you look at the history of what we've done to LGBTQ folks, we've castrated them. We've shocked them under their fingernails when we've shown people of the same gender and they got aroused. We have made women have heterosexual intimacy. We've used very scientific methods like snap a rubber band on your wrist if you get aroused by an image of the same gender. But reparative therapy, Exodus was a famous ex-gay movement. And what they would do is they would bring them into a camp-like situation and basically berate them and also abuse them physically in many cases until they were broken down and would say, okay, I'll be heterosexual. And some of these are long-term, some of these are camps that were kind of intensives, and some of these go on for years, where you are just in a group where you're told God doesn't love you, you are not part of God's community, you are not living God's will, you are a sinner, and unless you change, you're going to hell. And it's repeated over and over and over and over and over again. And then if you mess up and you somehow, come out of the group and you get involved with somebody of the same gender, that you go through it all again. Now, what's interesting in these movements, the leaders of those movements have all come out.
I've seen that they've come out as gay. That's really interesting.
I think it speaks to that power of that message.
Right.
That you are not okay. And
something is wrong with you.
Yeah. Exactly.
When I was in my late teens, I worked at a counseling center, and I would type out what happened in counseling sessions. I would type out the notes for the counselors. And it was at a religious counseling center. And often when people would come in and say, hey, I have these feelings, they would tell them to date women, especially men, date women. Do not do not even think about these kind of things. Don't cross your legs. Don't wear pink. Don't, you know, what was really interesting was they took from that and they would report it to the university I was at, and the university would follow them to look for gay meetings so that they could bust them, because it was illegal at the time. But it was a really nasty thing, and it was like praying and scriptures. Isn't there a movie?
Pray the gay away.
Yeah, Pray the Gay Away. Isn't there a movie that just came out as like Boy Erased or
Boy
something?
Erased. Yes, and if anybody, if you haven't seen it, it is really true to what occurs, and it's excruciating to watch, but it really does give you insight into what reparative therapy, conversion therapy does, and the incredible traumatic impact it has, lifelong.
So there have been some studies about what happens to people who have been through this. I mean, there's some claims by some religious communities that it works, that it actually changes their affectional orientation. What does the research show is really the result of this kind of reparative therapy?
Right. So a journey of living trauma, anxiety, depression, higher rates of suicide, higher rates of addiction, higher rates of inability to maintain relationships, because and again, you know, if you're beaten over the head with the Bible that says something's wrong with you, or you are beaten by a belt because you're told something's wrong with you, and you're told it not just in your church or synagogue or any mosque or any other religious institution. You're told, you know, what we know about marginalized populations is that, you know, I might have to go out into the world and I'm with people who are different from me and I get abused, but at least I can come home and then I'm around people like me. Well, our LGBTQ youth can't. They come home and they receive more heaped on. Something's wrong with you. You're not my child. You're disgusting. You're going to hell. So, you know, I'm hearing it from at school, perhaps. I'm hearing it from my family. I'm looking out at TV. And when I was growing up, there was no Ellen. There was no Will and Grace. There was no Pose. There was nothing. There was only this a paradigm that I didn't fit. And I didn't know what to do with it. So I kept trying to be that paradigm. And you know, it wasn't just harmful for me. Had I, you know, been involved with someone who was actually heterosexually, affectionately oriented, that would have been harmful in that relationship because I am not affectionally oriented to an opposite gender. And so we know about marriages where you force myself to get married. We know that, you know, intimacy, communication, conflict, we know multi-generational transmission of trauma onto the children. And then one day, you know, maybe one day, hopefully, that person says, that's it, I can't do this anymore, and walks away. Well, there's, you know, collateral damage from all of that. And this is going to be a newsflash, but what if from the very beginning we say, it's okay because you're human. You are who you are and you love who you love.
Yeah, and there's not even a coming out because you just are who you are.
You just are.
Yeah.
You just are.
You just are. Yeah. And you spoke about the, well, two things I was thinking about. One of GLSEN, GLSEN, they do research on school individuals. They said that LGBTQ youth hear 26 times a day microaggressions and different things, and only like 10% of instructors or administrators will step up. So I just can't even imagine 26 times a day. The other thing is LGBTQ youth or LGBTQ individuals 5 times more likely to die by suicide or attempt suicide. I've actually had some pastors say, well, gee, if they would choose differently, then they wouldn't be suicidal. That's how would you respond to that kind of thinking?
Okay, so I would turn it opposite. If I hate myself so much that death is the only way out, that's a problem. And in so many cases, that's true. They just can't take it one more day at 8 years old, and they hang themselves.
that they can't stand, that it's actually the outside world.
The outside, yes, it's the constant bombardment of anti-me,
Mhm.
of being bullied, of being told, there's something wrong with me, there, or hearing people say that's so gay when they're referring to something that is wrong or
Right.
ugly or weird.
Yeah.
I mean, and at some point, if I come to the decision that death is a relief, that's a problem.
That's a really bad statement. That is such a negative statement.
Yeah.
So I've had people come in for to repair the repair in therapy, and I'm sure you have too. So when we're looking at people who are coming in, because we do still have pastors who are doing it, and I know how many states now say that legally you can't do reparative.
18.
18. Okay,
Mhm.
and that's just for licensed individuals. Pastors still can, right?
That's right.
In those states.
Absolutely. And so, as I said, I live in Richardson in the Dallas area. There are a number of those organizations right here, and it still goes on today.
Yeah. I was really surprised that Utah came out and was against it. Really surprised, because the narrative was, no, we're going to say it's okay, but they actually did. I was really surprised with that piece. So having clients come in who have dealt with reparative therapy, and I'm putting reparative therapy in quotes because it's not, how do you repair that? What are some things that you've seen, and how do you work with that as a counselor?
Right. And what I see is agony, emotional agony, and distrust, and self-hate, and hopelessness and helplessness.
Mm-hmm.
And because again, it's particularly coming from a very religiously devout family, and having gone through reparative therapy where you're told that you're an abomination and you're going to hell. You may no longer be dependent on your family, but those messages are still there. They may still be said. They may have rejected you completely, but yet you want a relationship with your God.
Mm-hmm.
So that's important to you.
Mm-hmm.
How do I make the two meet? And how can I have a positive, healthy relationship with my God when I'm told that my God hates me?
Yeah,
And
that I hate me, God hates me. So it's
right,
very triggering to think of any religious or spiritual experience at all.
absolutely. And talk about an existential ongoing crisis. How can I be in a relationship where I feel love, where I do feel like myself? I
Mm-hmm.
feel authentic, I feel congruent from my mind to my heart, and yet I know I'm going to hell.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a sinner. And
Mm-hmm.
so it takes a long time to work through the idea that that's not true, and have resources available for that client. And you have to know the resources so well, because the worst thing that can happen is you say, oh, try this church. They say they welcome everyone. Yeah. And
Yeah.
then you read their 7 philosophies, and that's not true.
Yeah, it's not gonna work.
Right. But you do it out of, I'm assuming good intent, but now you've just set your client back 20 years to relive what they went through when they went through reparative therapy.
So the spiritual piece takes a long time, even connecting with the religion. I did a little study of 20 LGBTQ individuals who came out of high fundamentalist religions.
Mhm.
And all 20 of them tried so hard to be affectionately heterosexual. They tried so hard. They tried everything. Several of them tried reparative therapy. Their parents made them go through it. Every single one of them attempted suicide. Every single one of them. And they finally came to a choice point of, I need to either leave my family or leave my church and not have anything to do with them in order to keep my health. If I keep going back here, I can't keep myself. It's like a decision point of, do I choose me or do I choose my family who are involved in this church? Do you see that same kind of thing with what you're working with?
Yeah, absolutely. And what kind of choice is that? I have to reject my God, my church, my religious affiliation, my family, or I can be me.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. I mean, and that struggle is so difficult and so painful because, and particularly with parents, because your parents, were taught that they're supposed to love us
Mm-hmm.
and
Unconditionally,
unconditionally, just like
but
God, right?
yeah,
And
but both are very conditional. Both the parents
exactly,
and the God,
and
very
God,
conditional.
exactly. And so, you know, I find that also that with that being the kind of the paradox, that it's very difficult for clients to drop down into that, because then they remember what it was like to be berated. They remember what it was like to be, told to pray away the gay. So they are re-traumatized as they go through the healing process and trying on, hey, I am okay. Hey, I'm going to try on a resource that you recommend, that I'm going to be accepted and affirmed. Hey, I'm going to read this book. There's a great book out there, Unclobbered, by Colby Martin, which takes a look at the 6 clobbering verses and gives context and analysis of them. I'm going to try this on. And what I found, Cyndi, when it really starts to really starts to take effect, is when they're able to tell others, I went through reparative therapy and I survived.
Mm.
It is not unlike any other abuse. It's like sexual abuse, it's like physical abuse, spiritual abuse. The idea that I would be able to say I went through spiritual abuse,
Mm-hmm.
abused.
Mm-hmm. And at its core, it just completely says you are not worthy. You are not worthy to be alive.
Right.
How do you help people regain or just gain, because I guess they've never had it?
Mhm.
How do they gain that sense of self and confidence in themselves? What kind of therapy do you use? What kind of resources do you use?
Right.
How do you help them gain that sense of self? Because I think spirituality is almost like secondary. It's like, I need to figure out who I am before I can figure out what I am, who I am spiritually.
I use a number of different approaches. First of all, psychoeducationally, I was blessed to be the former president of the American Counseling Association, and went through the years when it was so controversial to change the code of ethics to add that one cannot engage in therapy that is not supported by the data. And it was all about reparative therapy. We couldn't even get that written in. We could get written in, you can't engage in therapy that's not supported by the data. So from the beginning, I am gently but firmly there is absolutely no data to support reparative therapy is effective. None.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one. And it's unethical for mental health professionals to engage in it. So if you've gone to a counselor or a social worker or a psychologist who has said, I can change you, that's unethical. And that's reportable.
Mm-hmm.
Then there is this creating a sacred, safe, affirmative space for this person. And you may be that only space for some
That is
time.
true. Yeah.
And so that relationship, and I'm all about the relationship, that relationship that your client has with you is sacred.
Mm-hmm.
And they have to be able to trust you to talk about what that experience was like, is like, and continues to be like. Third, I think, cognitive behavioral. I mean, the self-talk. I mean, and it's like, it's it's like watching a channel of horror is when I'm feeling bad about myself, when I'm feeling disconnected, when I'm feeling stress in a pandemic, I turn on the channel that I'm hated, that I'm perverted, that I'm disgusting, and I'm going to hell. And it's very difficult to turn off that channel if I don't have the techniques. So I just sit and watch and I spiral down. So we got to replace that channel. You got switch, change. Here's a channel that says that is absolutely not true.
Mm-hmm.
You are kind, you are loving, you're in a loving relationship. Here are resources where you can be with people of maybe like faith or different faiths, but all in community with a belief system that says, God loves me because I'm human. God
Mm-hmm.
made me in his, her, their image.
Well, and I love this whole concept of a family of choice, of moving from people who do not accept you, who do not love you, to creating a family where you do feel accepted, that you do feel that you belong.
That's right. It's critical. And that creating a family of choice is, it really makes an enormous difference. And sometimes, clients have to make that difficult choice that, I'm not going to be around my family because it is so traumatizing. It is so noxious. It is so poisoning to my mental health and well-being that I'm not going to be around you. And if you try to do an intervention, or if you try to go down the road of, this is just like bestiality, this is just like sexual addiction, this is just like, fill in the blank.
Right. Pedophilia is another one.
That's right. I'm not going to be around you because that's unhealthy. I'm not going to hear that anymore. I know it's not true.
So another question, what if somebody comes in who's still in the process of trying to fit in, and they come to you and say, listen, I'm trying, can you help me? I'm having these feelings. Can you help me get rid of them? So what do you do as a counselor? How do you work with that kind of individual?
I have two parts of the answer. First of all, I ethically, humanly, active as an activist I will not engage in because there is no therapy, but I would not engage in therapy to get rid of the feelings. That said, I think it's important as a therapist to explore that. Where is this coming from? What is that about? Let's unpack that together a little bit. And if we do get to the bottom, and after we've unpacked what happened or what message you just received, what is this really about? You still want me to fix you? I can't work with you.
So for you, it's an exploration of where this is coming from before we move forward.
Right.
You don't respond to the question itself, but let's unpack what's around this.
That's right. All right. Where is that coming from? Help me understand why you want to get rid of it. What's that about?
Okay. So how did you, I'm very interested, how did you go through your spiritual journey? You had all of these kind of messages, and you were able to go away to a boarding school, all female, that actually cracks me up, and then go away to college. Where are you spiritually? Where were you able to land to feel a safe space, a place where, okay, I feel comfortable in this?
Right. I certainly turned away from the church, a Presbyterian church that I grew up in. It just made no sense to me. And, I'd have friends from church who would, find out, as I was in my mid-20s, 30s, and be rejecting and try to, you're not really that way. So I completely rejected Presbyterian, as I was raised Christian in a Presbyterian church. I took on, I became very attracted to Judaism, and that was because of the behavioral aspects of Judaism, and in fact, Tikkun Olam, which is to heal the world. That made sense to me. And in Reform Judaism, there's acceptance, and so I really gleaned onto that. That didn't stay, and that was because of a relationship. And you'll hear that as a theme, right? So the relationships associated with the religion would have an impact if the relationship fell apart. So would my affiliation with the religion. And where I landed right now is Buddhism. That makes the most sense to me in terms of being and value of sentient beings and being in the world, and trying to do my best to heal the world and be part of the world. And so that's where I landed. It's been a journey, and it continues to be a journey. And I wanted to do that because I will say this: I no longer accept that doctrine that something's wrong with me. So I could now go into any place of worship and experience it for what it is, and not take on those messages.
And not be triggered by it.
Exactly.
So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate your vulnerability and transparency there. Transparency, that's the word I'm looking for. So with COVID-19, a lot of LGBTQ individuals are having to go back home to an unsafe place. A place where they have to use their dead name or their, you know, the name that their parents gave them that they no longer take on as their own, a very unsafe place. So what kind of thoughts are you having about that kind of thing? What are you thinking?
You know, I have a couple of thoughts on this. You know, I keep wondering when they're gonna imply that the pandemic was caused by homosexuals.
Yeah,
Haven't
I'm
heard it
waiting
yet.
for that too. I'm waiting for that narrative.
And you and I have had informal conversations about the lessons we didn't learn from HIV and AIDS. That's where I started my career. And as you know, HIV and AIDS was seen as a gay disease, and it was God's punishment. And so ship them all off to an island and let them die. And we'd leave them in hospitals, and no one would touch them. No one would care for them. They come in full hazmat gear. And we didn't talk about it. We didn't name it. We didn't have vaccines. We didn't have, oh, wow, this is sounding familiar. So, you know, there's a part of me that waits. Oh, one of these days, they're going to point the finger. I feel it.
Yeah.
But, you know, the great thing is, it's funny, it's a great thing. So we've been teaching our kids, right? No more screen, watch your screen time. Keep it to a level. Of course, now they're home. And they're on the screen all the time because now they're going to school on screen. But with that, with the internet, you know, if you find the right resource, you can still have support and still have
You
those.
froze for me, Colleen. You froze for me. Say, repeat your last comment.
Where did I lose you?
We're putting them on the screen time,
Right.
but with that,
it's so funny. It's a paradox, right? We've been, you know, on them only 6 hours a day, and now we've of course expanded that to 12 because they're going to school online.
18.
Exactly. So, but there are resources online. There are group chats. There are ways that they can stay connected with the Resource Center, where I know you did your internship. There are still sources of affirmation and value that they can reach out to in the middle of the night when they're alone and get on their phones and say, okay, I am okay. I am okay. Now, I say that, I do not want to discount how painful it is to be in shelter with people who hate who I am and despise the fact that I love someone of the same gender. And we know that the trauma is exponentially going to increase. We know that the violence is exponentially going to increase.
Mm-hmm.
But we know that the emotional trauma is exponentially going to increase. And if we ever have needed counselors on the front line, it's now.
Mm-hmm.
So providing telehealth, providing pro bono telehealth, making ourselves accessible to those LGBTQ youth who are in houses of hell and horror. Need us. Now more than ever.
And helping those individuals find those resources, that is a really nice thing for those who do have access to computers and the internet, which is another socioeconomic thing we could talk about.
Absolutely it is, right? I mean, how many homes don't even have that access to that? So then you add that on as yet another, you talked about microaggressions, right? You add on all of these layers of weight that say something's wrong with you. We're going to see an increase in stress and anxiety and depression and helplessness and hopelessness and suicide. We know that. And when you talked about, 26 times, I'm at school, it's school. 26 times a day I hear something's wrong with me. That's 1,000 cuts, paper cuts per microaggression. Now I'm hearing it in my home.
And how much of a deeper impact that is. These are the people who helped raise me, who helped define me as to who I am.
Right.
Yeah. And how much harder that is. I was talking to a minister. I'm actually going to talk to him tomorrow about transgender individuals going to church. We were having the conversation about how it's not easier, but to tune in to different churches and tune in to different websites to stick a toe in the water Is this a place I can trust? Is this a person I can trust? Is this a group I can trust? So like Googling the resource center in Dallas and having their online groups and putting a toe in, is this a good place? Is this a spiritual place I can try without having to completely go or be a part of?
And I would just add to that, Cyndi, the onus is on them to prove it to you. It's not, I want you to show me that you can affirm and value me. So if you stick your toe in and you're not getting that message, get your toe out.
Get your toe out. Get out. Yeah. Yeah.
Hashtag get your toe out.
I like that. Let's start trending that new hashtag, get your toe out. I love it.
Right.
So what kind of resources do you suggest for people who are looking to study this, to be a counselor, or to heal from this whole kind of thing? What kind of books do you see? I know I suggest for parents, PFLAG, Parents, Friends, Lesbians, and Gays. Is that right? Parents and Friends of Lesbians. Yeah, PFLAG.
Yeah, right. I think GLSEN, you mentioned GLSEN before, Gay, Lesbian, Straight Educators Network, chock full of resources. I think the Resource Center here is incredibly, an incredible resource. Yes, Gay, Lesbian, Straight Educators Network, tons and tons of information on that website. I think, Unclobbered, it's on YouTube. So you don't even have to have it on Kindle or on Audible or any other of those, ways we listen to things. It's there to listen to and to learn different interpretations of verses that have clobbered us over the head.
Right. And I found a very easy book to read. It's called Is It a Choice? I don't remember who it's by. But it's just got a question and answer kind of thing for those who are just learning and starting to kind of.
I think it's Eric Marcus who wrote that.
Eric Marcus, yeah.
Yes. Right.
And I've also used What the Bible Really Says About Homosexuality. I don't remember who that one's by. I never remember who they're by. I just.
Right. Well, and I would also offer us as resources. The two of us, our program, we have incredible faculty. And leadership, we are a resource also, and certainly SMU in itself is a resource, and anybody who would reach out to me or to you, we would certainly help find and help with access to resources that are supportive and affirmative.
Right. Yeah. I think you've been the one that started this. This isn't an advertisement or a commercial, but SMU is doing a 3-class certification for licensed counselors, right? To be working with LGBTQ. Is that right?
Well, yes, we're interested in providing online training because what we know, counselor educators and counselors, typically have received one course, and it's usually called multicultural diversity, and that's where we talk about people who are different, and there might be a chapter, might.
And so we might have one class or half a class.
Right, and so it's infused throughout our curriculum. We do have the concentration, and in talks with our chair, Dr. Greta Davis, what if we could take this online, this concentration, and offer it as a resource for counselors, starting with the state of Texas, who don't have this training, who don't know the language, don't know the terminology, don't know the history, her story, their story, don't know how to provide affirmative therapy. And so we're working on designing that, thinking about it, planning it. It is desperately needed.
Right, it is.
Who can do it.
I'm on the board for LGBT, the Association of Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender, and Counseling, and they have a website. I just put LGBT website to panelists there, and they have a number of resources as well that are very, very helpful. And they're also going to be working on a certification for counselors as well.
Great, and I would add LGBT.
Oh yes, that's right. You're the director for LGBT. That's Texas Association for Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender, in Counseling. Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
So what questions didn't I ask you that you would like to answer? And then we can go to questions. I think there's 7 questions right now coming in.
Okay. Boy, you asked me a lot of questions. Let's see. let me just, I wonder if I could share one more story.
Please.
Yeah. So when I was doing, I did my doctorate at the University of Virginia, and what I studied was there is no such thing as homophobia. There's no such thing as phobia toward people. Doesn't exist. No such thing. There's not African American phobia. There's not Asian phobia. It is prejudice. Why is that important? Why is it important, homo prejudice? Well, because in the court system, if you say that whenever you brutally beat Matthew Shepard because you were phobic of him, you get a lesser sentence. People wouldn't serve on my committee because they were afraid if they served on my committee, that might mean that they were gay. And they said to me, listen, you know, you need to go to the American Counseling Association conference because you'll find people like you there. And I went, and there was this little teeny weeny sign that said meeting of LGBT. It wasn't called that at the time even. It was a little memo. So I went up the back stairs and the circular stairs, and there was a little window that opened, and I knocked 3 times, and I spun in a circle, and the door opened, and I came in, and then I walked in, and I walked out co-chair of LGBT. It took us a tremendous amount to be. We were not a division of the American Counseling Association. We had to go through a tremendous process. They didn't want us to be a member. In fact, there's a significant region of the American Counseling Association that threatened to leave if we did become a division.
Oh, wow.
And we ultimately became a division. And ultimately, again, one of the greatest privileges of my life was to be the American Counseling Association president. And one of the policies that ACA had, and I was president in 2008, 2009, was that they would publish every letter that came into the editor. And a letter came in, it was just about as I was finishing my presidency, that said, every day I wake up and I thank God I'm not gay, and I thank God I'm not a lesbian. And I remember the sickening feeling I felt because I had spent a year as president, all traveling the world, talking about social justice and advocacy and affirmative therapy, and I couldn't stop that letter. So I didn't want to give the impression that the battle, my own personal advocacy, my own commitment to social justice is any way over. It continues. The onslaught continues. I continue to make choices. Do I tell you who I am and who I love, or is this too threatening? And could I be hurt? And I need to make that choice. That's the choice I can make. So it's not an easy journey, but we're in this together. And there is support. And even today, at this point in my career, I could share stories of where I have experienced prejudice and bigotry and shaming of who I am and who I love. So it's not something you just, okay, done, next issue.
Next issue. Well, and I'm an ally, not near as the amount of shaming, but even coming out as an ally, I remember my doc program saying in my research class, I was going to do a qualitative study about something to do with LGBTQ, and my professor said, don't do that because you will be immediately dismissed by all the professors around you, thinking that you are a lesbian and that you are promoting your issue. And it was so shocking to me that this professor, you actually know him, would come out and say that I should stop doing any kind of research or advocating or talk. And so I talked about social justice advocacy, and he said, you can do everything but that. Don't do that. That will kill your career, which was just heartbreaking to me to hear that as an ally, that's what I was getting. I couldn't imagine how it would be to be LGBTQ and have that happening to me at the same time. But
yeah, and I'm sorry. It is just heartbreaking. Yeah. And I will also say this: we need you. Thank you for being an ally.
Well, thank you for your social justice advocacy, and I'm sorry. That's my very Canadian way of saying I'm sorry that this has happened to you as well. But yeah, and it does happen. But should we go to the questions? Ashlen? Looks like we got a few.
Yep. Thank you. And thank you both for that wonderful presentation. I did not want to jump in the middle of that because I just felt like it was so good and the flow was great. So thank you very much. Here are some of the questions that we had come through. Someone actually gave a book recommendation, and I don't know if either of you have heard of this. It's titled The Failure of Evangelical Mental Health Care, Treatments That Harm Women, LGBT Persons, and the Mentally Ill by John Weaver. Came out in 2015. But yeah, I'll be sure and mention it in the chat if any of you guys wanted to check it out.
Sure, we'll look at that.
Sure.
Okay, thanks.
Someone said, one of the things that I hear lately from fundamentalist religious people is an acknowledgement of the struggle of same-sex attraction.
SSA, yeah. Have you heard of that, Colleen?
Yes.
SSA, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I hear a lot about that, yeah.
With a suggestion that it might not be able to be changed, but that individuals who struggle in this way can choose celibacy. What would you say to those who use this language and suggest this as an alternative if the gay or lesbian person holds a religious view that same-sex affectional orientation is wrong?
I would say a number of things. First of all, there is nothing in the Bible that condemns being sexual or not being sexual, being asexual, for instance. And the idea that, you know, if someone has an attraction to someone of the same gender, that if they just don't act on that somehow makes it okay, even though they do certainly have romantic and attraction to that person. There's just no logic to that because it devalues and makes less equal that relationship to any other relationship where there's love and romantic attraction. And it's not the struggle. I'm not having the struggle with the intimacy. That's actually, thank goodness, because now it makes sense. Now I hear the bells and whistles and the birds that I'm with another woman. So that's not what I need removed. What I need removed is your prejudice and your stigma and your judgment of who I am as a human.
Let me add to that of just thank you, that was great, but also we're condemning these people to a very lonely life. You can have your same sex attraction, but you can't act on it, which means you're either going to not have a relationship or you're going to be in a relationship where there are no bells and whistles. We are condemning people to not be who they are, to be their authentic selves, and how lonely that is, and how, well, inauthentic. I don't know how else to say that.
Thank you very much for answering that. You know, I come from a fundamentalist Christian background, and there's a very well-known reparative therapist in the group that I came from. And a few of the ways, first off, it is described as SSA. And it's just like, well, you know, you can choose, you can have this, but you have to remain celibate. And that's something that I hear so often. So it's interesting. Thank you very much.
Well, and also what I've gotten are partners of individuals who have struggled with SSA, and then they marry someone of the other gender, and then I end up with the partner who feels so lonely and who feels so invalidated as a person, and like somehow they failed, and how they are missing something in the relationship and asking what's wrong with them. And it's okay, let's not only condemn the person to say you can't act on this, but how about the person that they do end up with, and the loneliness and the heartbreak that comes with that as well.
Yeah, yes, it's horrible. Thank you. Someone said, with regard to reparative therapy, 18 states don't allow it. Can parents ship their children out of state to be treated in a state that does allow it?
I mean, parents have that authority and they own consent. So sadly, yes.
Yeah, just like you can ship your kids to any mental health facility or drug rehabilitation. Yeah, you can. And I've seen that happen with members of my former church, of shipping their kids out to heal and repair, and then they come back more damaged. Yeah. Sadly.
Well, I know that the reparative therapist who is in my former group, he will not work with minors. You know, there's certain loopholes that often reparative therapists will try to pursue. So Someone said, thank you for the honest, insightful, and well-informed discussion. Well done. So proud to be your colleagues. That was from Greta.
That's nice. That's our boss. That's nice.
Someone said, what would someone need to study in order to help people with spiritual abuse, cults, etc.?
Well, my first recommendation is ICSA because it's a fabulous resource, and their website has, and their conferences are great. They just put out a book, I think it was a couple of years ago, about being a cult-informed therapist.
Cult recovery. Yep.
Cult recovery. It's excellent. The book on, I've got a couple resources here. The Subtle Power of Spiritual Abuse, I think is a great, oh, you can't see it with my flag in the back. Let me take down my flag. But you can see some of these, The Subtle Power of Spiritual Abuse by Johnson is a great one. Leaving the Fold is a great one. I really like that because it's interactive exercises. The Body Keeps Score is a great one. And then Trauma Recovery. Oh, Trauma and Recovery, I think is just an excellent one.
Yes.
By Judith Herman. Is there anything you recommend, Colleen?
You hit them all, although who is the Harvard African-American minister who wrote an amazing book? I can't. Let me think of it, and I'll get it. Ashlen, I'll get the resource to you. It's just it's a really beautifully written book that really does what Unclobbered does in terms.
Oh, great. Yes, please send it my way. I
Yes.
have been putting resources, and Pat Ryan has too, in the chat to all attendees. So I think the ICSA website's in there, Cult Recovery, you know, there's a bunch of resources that we've been putting in, but feel free to email me, all those attendees out there, if you guys are missing a specific resource. Someone mentioned, let's see, to this point, you're both talking about right now, the Validation Station is a terrific resource for our trans brothers and sisters. And the service has been expanded to the US since this article was written. And that's the validationstation.net. It has to do with trans people in self-isolation during the lockdown.
Oh, perfect.
From what I understand. So, yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, tomorrow we're going to be talking to a minister who works with transgender individuals. So that will be great.
Great.
That'll be awesome. Thank you.
And the book, by the way, I was talking about was by Reverend Gomes.
Spell that for us.
Yeah, spell that last name.
Gomes.
Okay. I love this question here. Can people live fulfilled lives without spirituality? I resoundingly want to say yes. Absolutely. You don't have to have that spiritual connection. And right now, the Pew Research shows that 23% of the American population responds with that they have no religious affiliation, and NONE is what they call it. I don't want to say none because that sounds like NUN, but and they have found that they are living very happy, productive lives. So do you have to have spirituality? No. What do you think, Colleen? What are your thoughts?
I completely agree. I completely agree.
Someone asked, or not so much a question, but they said, thank you so much for this webinar. It felt very normalizing and healing, even for someone who has been out and proud for a while. I love the stories, anecdotes, humor, and compassion from both of you, Colleen and Cyndi. Conversion therapy is still legal in the UK, and we are working hard to destroy it. Thank you both for all the hard work you do. That was a very good comment.
Thank you. That's very nice.
Someone said, I'm a man married to a woman for 20 years and have a 16-year-old daughter. My wife has known of my issues the whole time. We have been in evangelical Christianity all our lives. I had to confess my sins publicly while on a church staff. I have been in reparative therapy for most of this time until lately, where I have began to accept myself as gay. I have a wonderful therapist now. I have no idea what to do next. I feel voicing my real feelings will devastate my immediate family, but I feel like I am living such a lie.
Wow. That is, I can't even imagine. Colleen, you want to?
I mean, I think, first of all, your courage is, it just is so powerful to be able to tell us and share your story and invite us in. I'm honored, and we hold this space for you. You're in therapy. Sounds like you have a affirmative therapist. I'm so grateful for that. And you know, in terms of what do I do, you're doing it, and you're doing it with grace and courage. And if there's anything that we could do to support you as you walk this journey, because I also know that walking this journey, you know, as your mental health goes up, it sounds like those around you, they go down. And that's a really difficult and hard place to be in, because you know, to be congruent with yourself is so important. You know how it feels, and yet it hurts others for you to be congruent. So I understand that dichotomy, and I'm sorry. And you're doing, sounds like, what you need to do. And again, you're doing it with grace and strength and courage. Thank you.
Great answer, Colleen. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you for being vulnerable, for sharing that with us.
Yeah, thank you.
Someone asked, do you have any thoughts on the Unification Church and its anti-LGBTQ views? Are you familiar with Richard Cohen's books, Coming Out Straight and Alfie's Home?
Are you familiar with those, Colleen? I'm not familiar with them.
I'm not, no. But however, if I were to guess, it sounds like it's an anti LGBTQ,
Yep.
and anything that is anti-LGBTQ is actually anti-human.
Yeah, anti-human, absolutely.
Someone said, after my traumatic experience in a cult, I was church shy for a long time. Eventually, I found a church that I felt very comfortable in and my son loved. But one day in service, the pastor said, God said Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. Excuse me? I'm not gay, but I was so offended. A person of God could actually say such a stupid and ungodly thing. I stopped going after that. When I tell people God made all of us and God doesn't make mistakes, it shuts them up. My question, I firmly believe it was a flawed homophobic human who wrote all the anti-gay propaganda in the Bible. Are there any scriptures to counter that? Excellent presentation. And you guys mentioned what comes to mind immediately is the Unclobbered book as a resource. Anything else you'd like to add?
Go ahead.
You go ahead.
Well, the other book, What the Bible Really Says About Homosexuality, where it similarly goes through the clobbered verses. Go ahead. You had another one.
I mean, you know, love one another. I'd like to think that we're at the table of Jesus right now, we'd be sitting closer at the table and not on the floor, or even not in the room.
Right.
Because we're human, and if you were believing what the message was, which is we're all made in the image of God, we'd be right there having
we'd all be there. No one would be, out in the other room or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you know, I appreciate your indignation about, you know, it's not Adam and Steve. I need you. You're an ally. Mm-hmm. And I so appreciate your indignation, and you're no longer supporting that kind of prejudice and stigma and harmful rhetoric. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Within my family, dealing with a degree of don't ask, don't tell, regarding my being queer, as well as being a former cult member, hoping you can point to queer counseling, one-to-one resources, possibly within ICSA, is a great question. And just resources within ICSA that come to mind, we do have a counseling resource list of people within ICSA who are familiar with just issues regarding spiritual abuse, you know, leaving cultic groups. There's also a resource that Pat Ryan has. It's cult recovery specialist, I believe. Cyndi, is there anything you wanted to add to that as well?
I do want to add a caveat. I love my fellow ICSA mental health providers. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are allies for the LGBTQ community.
Sure.
that you have a right to interview any potential mental health professional, put your toe in, and if it's not affirming, get your toe out.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We need more affirming, people in our network for sure. And so just, and I know Cindy's name is mentioned in our counseling resource list. And depending on where you are locally, perhaps there could be local resources. I feel like we've listed so many resources today. What I can do is send out an email to all the participants with all the resources just laid out for everybody once again. So
and you can email me and I can help you find through Algebatic or Talgebatic professionals throughout the US. Not as familiar throughout the world, but I could probably find throughout the US and Canada. And I'm sure, Colleen, you have a number of resources that you can reach out to as well, because you were ACA president. I bow to you.
Yeah. You have to find someone that's right for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Someone said, after hearing so much hate from God, is it hard to see him as God?
Him? Her?
That's where I went. I was like, him?
I would put forth, it's hard to hear it from people who are saying it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe that God's saying that.
I'm with you, Colleen. To me, it's people saying it, which is one of the reasons that I left the group that I was in, was they were talking on one hand, love one another and God is love and all this kind of stuff, but by their actions and what they did and what they were promoting, it was not an environment of love. It was not an environment of we're all human, let's celebrate each other. So for me, there is a real problem with how people are defining this. And now these people are out of the way of me establishing and finding out a relationship with spirituality, non-spirituality. So I have moved the people out and figuring it out myself. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And this is the last question that's come through. And I just wanted to remind everybody, please, if there were unanswered questions, you could reach out to me. I could send your questions off to Colleen or Cyndi, or however you want to get in touch with us. We've also put your personal contact information in the chat as well. So please don't be afraid to reach out if there wasn't something that you necessarily wanted to share via chat. I just wanted to say before I read this last question really quickly, we do have a session this evening at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. It's a live presentation with Bill and Lorna Goldberg on the impact of COVID-19 on former cult members. It should be excellent. So please tune in tonight at 8 p.m. if you are able. And then Cyndi, I'm trying to think, you've given like 4 talks now with people.
Yeah, it'll be the 4th one tomorrow, but it's just interviewing people who would have been at the Spiritual Abuse Conference. And tomorrow's the pastor, Mark Wingfield, who put a vote up with his church to be accepting of LGBTQ or not, and a third left, very high income people. But he stayed supportive and has 2/3 left. And he's super outspoken and supportive, a welcoming community. And he was going to speak at the Spiritual Abuse Conference. His name's Mark Wingfield. I think it'll be fascinating.
Great. Thank you for sharing. Someone asked if we can't log on at 8 p.m., will this be uploaded somewhere later? Yes, I hope to get all these recordings on YouTube by the end of April on the ICSA YouTube channel once we get the speaker's permission. So thank you guys so much. So the last question that came through, I wanted to quickly pass to you guys is, what developmental considerations come to mind as you think about working with children, adolescents, emerging adults, middle adults, and individuals in later adulthood going through the coming out process? And it's an excellent question.
That's from the notorious DLG, by the way. I'll let you take that one, Colleen. Sorry, it's one of our colleagues. We adore him.
I was like, who's the notorious DLG?
Let me kind of give a broad answer, and then I'll Cyndi, if you want to take over, that'd be great. The coming out process is not finite; it's ongoing. Mm-hmm. And in terms of childhood, adolescence, what what do I recommend? Freedom to explore. That really is the task, and not put restrictions around gender, restrictions around affectional orientation. Allow for exploration. That's what that time is for. In terms of young adulthood, middle adulthood, again, the coming out process / the inviting in process, Dr. De La Garza, as you once taught me. The inviting in process is a lifelong process. And I would say that it occurs each day, each hour, and those times when I experience myself, regardless of what age I was, I experienced affirmation, validation, and recognition of me. That's how I move forward in my development.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
And I know I would strongly recommend what am I? I'm a parent who has a child who identifies as bisexual. And what I have always found for her is, let's find support. Let's find supportive resources. Let's find supportive people. And if they're not supportive, we need to move away from that. Not allowing the negativity in. So now she's away living in another state. Who are the supportive people around you? Who's your family of choice around you? Who are the people within your life that can support who you are? So yeah, it's throughout the lifespan. I think that's really important.
And there was one last comment. I was born into the Moonies cult, and I was very devoted until college. I had to reject and ignore the God I knew before I could admit to myself that I was bi when I was 22. Sometimes I feel like it can be easy to not mention how I identify. Do you have any resources to navigate being bi? And I know, Cyndi, you just touched upon your daughter and just finding people and surrounding yourself with people who are affirming and kind. Any other resources that you guys know of that could be helpful?
And that's a really difficult one as bisexual, because there are microaggressions even within the LGBTQ community of saying, oh, you just haven't come to identify who you are yet. You know, talk to me in 10 years and we'll let you know. I think one of my students made that quote. It's like, yeah, there. So resources, books, do you have any, Colleen? Because I know.
Any of the resources we put forward, LGBT, PFLAG, GLSEN, any of those resources, Human Rights Campaign, any resources that are legitimate, and we've listed the legitimate ones, recognize that bisexual is an affectional orientation that is right on the same plane as any other affectional orientation. And it's not a stage, not a phase.
Yeah.
It is an affectional orientation, and it just is. And so any of those organizations that recognize any other orientation, I would go to those as resources.
Great.
Thank you so much. And for those of you who are joining today, we did a poll, and thank you for everyone who answered that poll. It's like 75% of you guys are new to ICSA or aren't members or anything. And so please, feel free to email me. I'd love to give you a free web membership to check out some of the resources we have. If you're struggling financially, especially, we'll give it to you for free during this time. We just want you guys to have the resources. Thank you again, Dr. Cyndi Matthews, Dr. Colleen Logan. It was an excellent presentation. Thank you for the resources. Thank you, Pat, for hosting today. And we'll make sure and email out all these resources one more time to our attendees. I think we had about 60 people attend today. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Bye. Thanks, Dr. Logan.
Thanks.